everyone, and welcome to another edition of Bombercast for mid-trade week 2022. This is your host, The Grizz, here with Bonta. How are you, Bonts?
I'm good, Grizz, and I'm thinking that tomorrow I might send the resume through to Tullamarine and see if they want me to come in and be CEO for the day.
Well, it sounds like it is like everyone gets to go at the moment on the Essendon executive. I will start there, I guess, because it is trade week and generally Essendon is in the news come trade week, but generally because of how hard Duro is to deal with, or a big trade target that we've targeted but not coughing enough picks up for. No, this week, if you haven't heard, Andrew Thorburn was hired, I think, was it Tuesday or Wednesday, as the CEO of the Essendon Football Club, and then resigned 24 hours later as a result of links to a Melbourne-based church City on a Hill being made public, or not being made public, they were always public, but being raised in the Herald Sun. Bonds, I'll get your thoughts on it first. This isn't a political or a faith-based podcast, so we probably won't get into the greater concept of, faith and workplace rights. But how did you see what happened at Essendon with Andrew Thorburn over those 24 hours?
Yeah, it's a tough one because, his time at NAB was obviously fairly clouded, as we saw with the Royal Commission, and I won't go into too many details and bore our listeners. But at the same time, from all reports, he did run a fairly inclusive workplace at NAB, which is obviously what I think was the overriding issue in the end, was the concerns over how inclusive he would be based on his association with the church. But I suppose at the end of the day, the club has that we have the Purple Bombers, who are a very, very dear part of the Essendon football membership base. We obviously have our AFLW side now. We have a whole heap of leading initiatives when it comes to inclusiveness in our game. And I'm not sure that Andrew's position as chairman of that church necessarily meshes. Whether or not he would have, tried to enforce his views, I don't think he would have. I don't think he would have enforced his views. I think if second he tried to, he would have been gone. But at the end of the day, I think if you're going to be associated with an organisation that may or may not be inclusive, and look, I'll be honest, I haven't dived deep into what they believe because it wasn't of great interest to me. I think the simple thing is you have to go, and the problem I've got, I think, which is a greater issue than perhaps even Andrew Thorburn going, is the fact that the club claims they didn't know about it. I mean, it's a Google search. It takes 2 seconds. It took somebody on Twitter 30 seconds to raise it. So, due diligence. It's a key word at Essendon, and it seems to have reared its ugly head again.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel necessarily about would he have run an inclusive workplace in terms of how relevant that is, because I think his time at NAB and Bank in New Zealand shows that he can do that. So I think Van der Adeen put a really good fine point on it in the thread a couple of times, and a couple other posts did. It was less probably in terms of who he was individually as a person, and more, like you said, the position he held as chairman of City on a Hill. Who knows, maybe if he stood down as chairman before he got the CEO gig, it might have changed things. I don't think it would have. I think as soon as the link was as soon as the link made mainstream news, the social media mob came after it, rightly or wrongly. It really was just an optics-based thing from what I can tell, just from the outside looking in. It was about holding a position as the chairman of what is a very conservative church. I've heard a bit about City on Hill. I know people who actually go to the one in Melbourne. It is a very socially conservative church in that regard, and an organisation which seeks to be inclusive. I think that what you said about due diligence is really important, though, because if it is an optics-based decision, then someone needed to pick up on the risk of the optics at some point. And EY, so Ernst & Young, the consultancy organisation currently doing the CEO search and doing the external review, apparently didn't look it up. Dave Barham, I think, said recently that they didn't ask him about his faith in the interview because that would have been illegal.
It is illegal to ask that question, but apparently it's not illegal to exclude based on your faith. But
that's it. So
it's a tough one.
Yeah, and I think, well, technically he resigned, but it's interesting if he stood up and said, no, I'm not resigning it either, what Essendon would have done. But my thing on it as well is, if you knew he was chairman of City on Hill, which I think they knew, and they were happy to sign him as CEO regardless, then you needed to back him or not hire him at all. It had to be one of the two. You had to crap or get off the pot, right? You couldn't hire him and then force him to resign 24 hours later, because now they look stupid, and they probably are. Look, the last 20 years and especially the last 8 weeks shows that we're not very smart as an organisation. But, people probably don't care about Andrew Thorburn, but good luck to him getting a CEO job at a major company in the next, 2 years? Like, they've torched his professional prospects for the short term at least. Like, it's just a no-win situation.
Yeah, they have. But I suppose when you've been CEO of NAB, you're probably not short of crust. So I think he'll probably muddle through the next couple of years. I mean, at the end of the day, what's Hurdy up to? He could always come on as CEO.
Oh, don't even. There's those rumors going around, and I just about threw my phone through a window when I saw it.
I don't think those rumors have any sort of basis in reality. As much admiration I have for James Hird, I don't think CEO of a football club is something that he's necessarily equipped to, no matter how many blocks of chocolate he has managed to sell over his time.
Yeah, so I suppose the next question I wanted to ask you is sort of surrounds the board. I think the CEO appointment and the resignation of Thorburn shows to a greater sort of dysfunctionality within our board and how we're making decisions. It sounds like Barham's just shooting from the hip at the moment, and we'll get to Barham in a little bit. But there was a news article that came out through News Corp, namely the Herald Sun, but it's obviously been distributed amongst our other papers since then, regarding an attempted coup, I want to call it. Sort of coup. I don't know how to explain it. Sheedy thinking he's playing 4D chess when he's actually playing checkers to try James Hird as coach. To put a fine point on it, he basically crossed the floor from the Brasher side of the boardroom to the Barham side to oust the Brasher side and get Rutten removed, thinking that and this is amazing, thinking he and Barham would be the sole decision makers in the coaching search, and that this search through EY and the coaching process would be a sham, which is why when Scott got the job and Barham didn't vote for Hird, he went off his chops and we went through the Herald Sun. It just seems like the board, even though we've cleaned out half of it, it's just a mess bomb.
Well, it depends on where you look at it, because I don't think you can talk about this without talking about Dave Barham either. And his first press conference wasn't great. The Thorburn move and game wasn't great, but was that his captain's pick? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think that was a board move as a whole. So I think the whole board needs to wear it. But it does appear to me that he is trying to undercut the boys' club that has existed, and he's trying to, at the very least, trying to sideline the coteries, Kevin Sheedy and whoever else you want to put there that we've been crying out as holding the club back for the last 20 years. I mean, Sheeds hasn't been there the whole 20-year period, but it is. I said on the board, and I'll say it again. It is classic Kevin Sheedy to think there would be a process involved to select a new coach, and at the end of it, his word would override everything. I mean, it's just not the way the world works anymore. And it hasn't worked that way since the mid-90s.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if that was really good gamesmanship by Barham for letting him think that, maybe. Thinking, I'll get Sheedy to cross the floor because he's anti-truck, knowing that he'll probably want Hird, but there's 6 other board members, and it was 6 by the time Andrew Wells joined, that we'll be able to outvote him if he wants Hird as coach. And it sort of, for me, that story joins a few dots for me, because I couldn't for the life of me figure out why Hird was told by someone within the club to apply, but then the coaching panel said, you need more experience. But when you think about it, that invitational apply probably came from Hird or one of the coteries that were came from Sheedy, one of the coteries aligned with Sheedy. So technically it's within the club, it's from a board member, but the coaching panel probably weren't too interested. And it sounds like he had a great interview, which is fine, but for all the reasons we've litigated, it never made sense for him to be the coach. What are your thoughts on sort of Barham in general? My thoughts are he's a bit of a corporate brawler is the term people use. He's an agent of change, comes, makes bloodies a few noses, makes a whole bunch of change. Those sorts of presidents don't tend to last very long from my experience in the corporate sphere, but they're good for, I suppose, shaking a joint up. And a bit like a bushfire sort of takes out a whole section of a bush, there's new sort of plants that grow up that need a bushfire in order to grow and to seed. And I don't know if Barham's just that bushfire that needed to come through the board at the time he did, just to clean out the old, and even if he only lasts 6 to 12 months, start the club on a new course.
I think the best description of Dave Barham I saw written on our board this week is he's not a president that's there when you win the flag, but he's the president that gets changes that gets you to the position to win the flag.
Yeah.
And I think your agent of change speech there was quite accurate. And I think, look, at the end of the day, I think he's been very good in getting the change. Now, as I said, his first press conference where somebody said, is Xavier's job safe? And he said, well, he has a contract. And someone, they immediately turned around and said, well, so does Rutten. And he just looked like a deer in the headlines. That wasn't great. He clearly hasn't had a lot of media interaction before, especially in that sort of space where, the questions aren't pre-recorded or you're not sent the list prior to study up on it. And the Andrew Thorburn appointment, because it ended so abruptly and the way it did was nothing short of a mistake. But other than that, I mean, he crossed the floor. He managed to get Sheeds across the line, seemingly under false pretenses, but I was confident that it wouldn't come back to bite him, which it turns out it hasn't, because really, I think at the moment, most of the Essendon faithful are sort of over Sheeds, to be honest. I think most of us are looking to move him on, which is probably something I wouldn't have thought 6 months ago. I would have said 6 months ago that Kevin Sheedy was locked into Essendon for as long as Kevin Sheedy wanted to be there, and that nothing would change. But I think his actions over the past few months, and his actions have come about the last couple of weeks. And I think he's actually come out because he's been outmaneuvered by Barham. Certainly seems to me that there's a lot more push for Sheeds to move on. So I think he's been good. I mean, Xavier Campbell, clearly been there too long. Move him on, tick, see you later. There were several people who'd been at Essendon, I think, far too long on their board. Simon Madden was one of them. Simon Madden was a legend of the football club. And from what I could see, he was doing everything right from the board side of view. But, he'd been there a while. We need fresh blood. Yeah. So I think Barham is going to go down as probably one of the least liked Essendon presidents because of the fact that he's taken on all these champions in Madden and Hurd and Sheedy and take your pick. But I think he's going to go down as one of the most effective ones that we really needed, because, if the rumours are true and Adrian Dodoro moves on at the end of trade period, then who's left, really, apart from Sheedy sitting on the board and seemingly has no power anyway.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? So, it's like at the end of a Batman movie. It's like not the hero, the hero we need, but not the one we deserve. But I would stop short of calling him a hero. And something that I don't know if I read it on BigFooty, but maybe it was an estimate of mine told me, he goes, the way that the coteries and the board were so entrenched how they were, to supplant that was never going to be clean. It was never going to be, well, sort of like Collingwood was last year. Now, Collingwood was a much smaller board. I think there's only 7 or 8 on their board. And sort of Eddie Maguire ran that club with an iron fist and total control for a while. But to get those people that you're talking about, those deeply entrenched Essendon people with the backing of the coteries out, and to get new people in, he was always going to have to bloody some noses. It was always going to be messy. And I think that's probably a salient point. And I imagine the success of Barham's tenure won't be known until 5 or 6 years from now. Because, if in 5 or 6 years we're successful, we'll be able to point it back to this time when all the changes we knew needed to be made. Xavier Campbell, who seemingly, one of the least talked about things this week was the fact that Michael Lombardi, a world-renowned sports management expert, came into the club in 2019 and Campbell buried the report. How is that not more news? But that sort of stuff, changed. But if in 5 or 6 years' time we're worse off or the same, then he'll just go down as another sort of benign president. But I suppose the goal of this podcast at the start of this week was going to be trade week, because lo and behold, outside of Essendon, there is a trade period going on. You wouldn't know because Essendon hasn't got a lot going on. We did target Jack Bowes from the Gold Coast Suns, who somehow was being paired with pick 7, and we can talk about that in a second, which seems overly ridiculous to me. How do you feel about Geelong getting Jack Bowes and the massaging of his contract, and somehow the Premier getting pick 7 out of the Gold Coast for it?
Look, I have no issues with it. I mean, I know there's a lot of outrage at the moment, but I think I said on the board at the time that a lot of the outrage from the Essendon people are the fact that he's not coming to Essendon, because I think a lot of us saw pick 7 and went, oh, here we go, free pick, you beauty. Then it turns out it's going to Geelong, and so all of a sudden it's unfair, and the AFL should step in. I mean, I think there was quite a few times, and it sort of started to drive me a little bit crazy towards the end. But Melbourne and Sydney was brought up. Melbourne and Sydney had a trade where the points weren't equal, and the AFL dumped that trade. It was either last year or the year before. The reality is the AFL changed the rules, and actually changed the rules prior to anybody knowing that this was what Gold Coast were going to do. I think maybe the AFL had some suspicion that they were going to do something similar to this, but they did change the rules. So salary cap dumps are now allowed. So to try and point to a previous deal under the old rules and go, well, that didn't get through, so this one shouldn't, is just a little bit silly. But yeah, I have no issues with salary cap dump trades. The fact that that's going to be Geelong, I mean, that's just, it's just Geelong, isn't it? They're just a very well-run organisation. And again, they've just beaten everybody else to the punch by being a well-run organisation. So more power to them. I mean, you can argue that we'll end up with a Premier League style competition where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But if we'd gone a little bit harder at Bowes, or we'd said the right thing here or there, then we'd be getting pick 7 and Jack Bowes, and we'd be celebrating and laughing and thinking it's the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah, so for the record, my view on it is very much the same, like good for Geelong, because first, this is what happens when you're a successful, well-run organisation. People will take less money to come play for you, and they'll take less money or they'll stretch money out. And a lot's been made of the lifestyle in Geelong. And 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't get people to go to Geelong. It was sort of a backwater town. And I know people that live in Geelong, like it hasn't changed that much in 10 or 15 years. It's just Geelong are now a really well-run organisation, and people want to come play for them. Just like, James Frawley and Brian Lake and David Hale wanted to go play for Hawthorn when they were successful, and when players were going to Sydney when they were successful. It's just how it works. And stop crying about it, Essendon, and become one of those clubs. Like Essendon's 15 minutes away from the greater sort of Gisborne, Sunbury area. So and Romsey and those sorts of areas where there's plenty of great lifestyle living. So they should be selling that. But people don't want to come to Essendon because it's a basket case at the moment. So I don't really have an issue with it either. Good for them. I think what we should really delineate though is, why did Gold Coast package up pick 7? So the reason they packaged up pick 7 was because that's what it was worth to them to get the entirety of his contract off their books. So they could have said, we just want to get rid of Jack Bowes, and maybe a few teams would have sniffed around. They probably would have had to pay maybe a portion of it. Maybe they have to pay half, like it's a Trelaw deal where Collingwood's still on the hook for 300 of the 900. Maybe a team they're paying 250. But then no, we want to get all of it off our books. We need to incentivize it. And so to them, the value of getting Jack Bowes off their books altogether was worth pick 7. And if that's what they valued that cap space at, to keep guys like Rao and Anderson and Ainsworth and King down the line, then good for them. I think it was slightly gratuitous. They had plenty of other picks they could have offered up, but good for them. What happens to Jack Bowes and his contract at Geelong is of no concern to the Gold Coast. The pick 7 was a value to get him off their books. And clearly Jack Bowes valued money, valued lifestyle and opportunity, and a club that seemingly was interested in him long before pick 7 was ever a thing, which I don't blame him for, to be honest.
No, and they do have holes in their midfield that I think he can potentially fill if he comes on. And the thing about which a lot of people are getting upset about is the fact they renegotiated his contract. Well, the simple fact of the matter is the Gold Coast could have done the exact same if they wanted to. But as you said, they don't want him on their books anymore. They don't want Jack Bowes' contract there at all under any circumstances. So they've decided to move him on. They could have very easily themselves spread his contract over the next 4 years, but he might have said to them, I'm not prepared to sign with you for 2 extra years on top of this, because I've already pushed back my money. And this is the thing. He's not getting paid $850,000 a year because Gold Coast think he's worth that. He's had money pushed back. So his contract, I think, was 3 or 4 years. And as a result of that contract, he's now owed a buttload of money because they haven't paid it to him, they've gone, look, can we just push this back into next year? Can we just push this back? And he's done the right thing by them. So I have a feeling that one of the reasons they haven't been able to renegotiate the contract with Jack is because he's turned around and gone, I've already done this for you guys. At some point, you're going to have to pay me, and you're not paying me now. So I want to go to a club that's going to appreciate me better. Turns out, as you said, it's Geelong because they showed interest before he was packaged up with pick 7. So, yeah, I don't have any issues with Geelong. I don't have any issue with the salary cap dump, and I certainly don't have issues with renegotiating contracts once a player moves clubs.
Yeah, I think from an optics point of view, they'll probably change something next year. I think the AFL, because they probably don't want this sort of deal. I think this deal is a one of one. Not many other clubs have a top 10 pick that they can just throw away like the Gold Coast do. And the Gold Coast, if you look at some of the trades they've done for high picks, like they traded, I think, a pick 10 for pick 27 once. Like, I think the greater questions have to be asked about Gold Coast frugality with their picks. But I think throwing pick 7 in for a salary dump is such a one of one. It's not going to happen very often because teams don't generally have top 10 picks they can just throw away like that. But we'll move on to actually things that are happening regarding Essendon. We'll go with someone looking to bring, or actually we'll go with someone looking to shift out probably, or not looking to shift out, that's likely going to be shifted out. Aaron Francis looks like he's going to be done for a third round pick to Sydney, or a future third round pick. What's your thoughts on that deal? I think it's probably good for all involved. I think he needs a break from Essendon. Sydney need a player like him in their background, and I think Essendon could use the list spot.
Yeah, I'll be disappointed to see Aaron go because I've always thought highly of him. I did so. I think I said at the start of the year in this podcast that he was the player I was most excited because he finally found a position they were going to play him in one, and then about 3 weeks into the season, I think he got injured, and then when he came back, they just threw him from end to end in the VFL, and it was sort of a case of why can't he hold a spot down? And it was like, well, because they're not giving him a spot to hold down. He's been told to flip flop. I mean, the reason Carl Hooker was such a good swingman was because we gave him an extended run in both positions, and then he became an amazing swingman as a result of it. Because I mean, apart from that one goal he kicked against Hawthorn to win the game, when James Brayshaw said, "What the bloody hell are you doing down there?" He really wasn't a great forward until we gave him an extended run, and then he became a great forward, and we were able to flick him back and forth without too much issue. But yeah, third rounder, it's probably about right. It's disappointing to an end for Aaron at Essendon, and it's even more frustrating because I have a feeling that Sydney are going to turn him into a star if they manage to keep him in the back line.
Yeah, well, he's a very Sydney type of player, isn't it? You think about that sort of 6'4" intercept marking type. You know, they've got a couple in Tom McCartan, Paddy McCartan, Dane Ramp, who plays that role. It's interesting. Will Gould, they've got, who was a first-round pick up there. He hasn't played yet. He plays a very similar role. I don't know how much footy he's going to play up there, but I think for his career, he needs a break. And I think we've stuffed his development over his entire career, to be honest. And he had some horrific breaks in terms of family stuff that happened off the field, homesickness. He wasn't one of the guys that dealt well with COVID. You know, he's not alone there. Plenty of guys struggled with that. So I'm not, blaming him necessarily for that. But I think if you were to play, to the Bill Simmons scenario, if you were to sort of simulate his career 100 times, I think this is probably one of the 15 to 20 worst versions that could have come out for a variety of different things that were probably outside of his control and some that were, unfortunately, with his fitness and stuff. But that pick that we're going to get for Aaron Francis, and good luck to him. I mean that in all genuine concern. Good luck to him in Sydney. It looks like that pick from that deal is going to get shipped straight to Carlton for Will Setterfield. Bit of deja vu. I feel like it's 2018 where Essendon's targeting Will Setterfield as a big-bodied midfielder. This time from Carlton, not GWS. He played 12 games for Carlton this year, came in late and played a couple of games inside midfield with George Hill and Matt Kennedy out and did okay. What's your thoughts on getting Will Setterfield in?
Yeah, he did okay. I think it's probably the most generous way you can describe it, isn't it?
Yeah, did okay, yeah.
Look, we haven't seen him be the man inside. GWS are obviously a stacked midfield, and then obviously Carlton, he's got Paddy Cripps and Sam Walsh and others in front of him there as well. I think if you look to when he first moved across to Carlton in 2019, and that was sort of when he was able to really do it without too much. I think, Cripps in front of him, not much else at the time. He still only had 17 touches a game. It's not an inspiring pick, but if you'd said to me this time last year that we were getting Will Brodie, I probably would have said the same thing. It's not an inspiring pick. It's a pick that I think, we finally are filling what I think is a need in the big body midfielder. But a little cynical part of me does go, are we doing that because we've identified this, or are we doing this because he's the one that got away from Adrian Dodoro at the end of 2018?
Yeah, so that's the burning question. I think, well, over this offseason, we've been linked to Jack Bytel, we've been linked to Liam Stocker, we've been linked to him. So I think it seems like we've genuinely identified big-bodied midfield players as someone that we need to target. As far as list balance go, out Francis in Setterfield, I don't mind it. We need more midfielders. I think we've got a few guys in that sort of second or third tall position. So from a balance perspective, I don't mind it. Look, it's probably going to be a cheapish deal. We've got $1.6 million in cap before we hit the cap floor. So we need to find someone to pay. We'll probably bring some contracts forward. I don't mind it as just a throw at the dartboard, even if he's just David Myers in the sense that he's a big-bodied mid that throws his weight around at stoppages. I don't think he's going to supplant Shield and Caldwell and Parrish, maybe Caldwell as inside mids, but he'll be a big body that we can throw around in there to carve out some space and block. The other thing with him is a Carlton mate of mine says they slimmed him down. He came to the club at about 85 at Carlton, and he got up to about 91 to play as an inside midfield, and then they slimmed him down to play on a wing. So we might see his body shape change over summer into a genuine sort of a tall, bulky inside mid to sort of play that bash and crash role. But I think it's more a throw at the dartboard than anything. And I don't think when you look at the draft, there's a few gun midfielders at the top, but they're not that big body type. So if we did want to fill that role, we're probably going to have to do it via trade.
Just one stat about the thing is we're hoping he's going to be the big body inside midfielder. So Will's played 57 games. In just 9 games, he had more contested possession than uncontested possessions.
Yeah, right.
So the hope that he's going to be this contested possession beast, I think, is one that just hasn't shown in his previous games. 9 out of 57 has he had more contested than uncontested. That's not filling me with confidence. But as I said, if we said we were going to get Will Brodie at the end of last year, I probably would have said the same thing. Although having said that, I think Will showed a lot more in the reserves than Will has. And by that I mean obviously Brodie has shown more in the reserves than Setterfield did this year. So look, it'll be a pick that I think he'll probably get a chance with us. Whether or not he takes it, I don't know. I'll be interested to see anyway.
Yeah, like I said, I think the role they had him playing on a wing at different points at Carlton, which probably explains at some point, but you were right, he played a lot more inside midfield earlier in his time at Carlton. And look, not every top 10 pick works out. And he was picked 5 or 6, I think, in 2016 when we took Andy McGrath. And maybe he's just not as good as we thought he would be at that age. And to throw at the stumps, see how it goes. But yeah,
at the end of the day, it's a third round pick, and third round. What are the odds? So I think it's been done before. The odds of a third round pick, getting up and becoming a 200 game player are less than 10%. So you may as well have a shot at the stumps and see what happens.
Yeah, and if you just trading him in for the pick that you got Aaron Francis for, so you're basically swapping. You're swapping, Francis for Setterfield. I feel like that's net balance, not necessarily positive or negative either way, but that's all right. But it doesn't look like we've got much else to this trade period. It's interesting that Brisbane and GWS are playing silly buggers, but I haven't heard the hard to deal with tag left. So apparently that's only reserved for Dodoro.
Matt Rendell tried it with Geelong, who then promptly did a trade the next day and showed that he really doesn't have much idea. But there is one question I just want to throw to you, Grizz, before we wrap up this evening, and it's not Essendon related. It's just something I want to ask. So Jason Horne-Francis, we know that he has requested a trade to Port Adelaide. He wants to go home. Now, I think I said on the board at the time that there are extenuating circumstances. They don't seem to be getting a lot of run in the media at the moment about, his stepfather.
Yep.
So I think that's sort of and I don't want to talk about why he wants to go home but I will just say that I think those extenuating circumstances to me make it a more palatable personal choice. I don't have any issues based on those circumstances, him wanting to go home. I don't think it makes him the crybaby tosser that North Melbourne fans would have you believe at the moment. But what I do want to ask you is, North Melbourne fans are convinced that they should be getting, 2 top 5 draft picks, 3 first rounders, all this sort of rubbish. Jason Horne-Francis went pick 1 last year. Now, at the end of the day, he should have gone pick 2 because North Melbourne should have bid on Nick Dacos. They didn't, so bully them, but they should have. If they now turn around and get pick 2 for Jason Horne-Francis plus something else, have they actually lost out on anything here? Because that's what it sounds like it's going to be at the moment. At the moment, it seems like they're going to give up pick 1 to get pick 3 and 12 or something from GWS, and then pick 2 is going to come from West Coast because Jason Horne-Francis is going to go to Port Adelaide. So what have North actually lost? I mean, you can argue they've lost 12 months of development, but I also think that based on what he performed last year and based on some of his attitude during the year, he probably wouldn't have. If you drafted now, he wouldn't go pick 1 or 2. So have North actually lost anything here? What am I missing? Why is Jason Horne-Francis suddenly so much more valuable now than what he was last year?
Okay, so I would write off this year at North Melbourne from a form standpoint. They sucked, and it did not sound like a happy locker room. They fired David Noble. I think that club, the CEO was on the nose all year. The Clarkson thing's been done to death in the middle. Like, this year's been a shambles for North. I think they have lost out because they had a deal on the table last year from Adelaide, which would have blown away anything they had this year. And I'm on the record of saying they're bonkers for not having accepted that Adelaide deal last year, which I think would have been essentially 4 last year, which was Josh Rochelle, 4 this year, and it would have been Melbourne's first round pick, which is 14 for their second, which would have been 19. So I think that's a much better deal, obviously, than they're going to get now. But that's all in hindsight, isn't it? We could have traded Joe Danaher for, whatever. But
So just now, knowing what you know now and how Jason Horne-Francis is now, if they get pick 2 for him, have they actually lost anything?
No, because they have pick 1, so they would have first choice either way. But they'll give pick 1 to GWS in this mooted major deal. No, probably not. Other than the 12 months of development, which wasn't really much of development considering how the year went, as we've discussed. They probably haven't lost too much. I think what they've lost is the optics battle. Trading your first round pick 1 year in. I think Tom Boyd's the only one who did that from GWS to the Bulldogs. So they've probably lost sort of the optics battle, but in terms of draft capital, probably not. Like you said, if they didn't pick Horne-Francis, they would have picked Dacos, which would have matched, and they would have gone with someone like Sam Darcy, who would have got matched for the Bulldogs. So you would have been on Finn McCallaghan or Josh Rochelle, who is nowhere near the talent that Jason Horne-Francis is. So I don't think they've lost out materially. It's not a great look.
Yeah, the only other player I can think comes to mind, and he didn't go pick 1, but Nathan Buckley was obviously a very high pick for the Brisbane Bears, and then they traded him immediately next year to Collingwood.
Yeah, and that was probably he was a zone selection, I think.
He was, yes.
From Brisbane, for Brisbane, because he was from the NT. But, that's a whole different kettle of fish. Anyway, look, we're probably going to have to wrap it up there. Only a few days left in trade week. We don't anticipate much is going to happen, but if something drastic does happen in the next sort of week or so, we'll probably jump on and have a chat. Otherwise, Bonds, it's been great to have you again.
Thanks, mate. It's been a pleasure as always.
No problems. Well, that's going to be us for today. I don't know when the next pod's going to be up, but thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, share it around, and we'll see you when we see you.